Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the delay. Can everyone hear me and see my screen? Great. So sorry for the delay. My computer decided to restart itself and it took a little while for it to boot up. So I apologize again for the delay. Welcome everyone to the ATA meeting for November. So for the setup for the webinar, same as usual, non-presenters are muted. Please use the questions area for questions. We'll answer as many in real time as possible. The question should be available on the left side controls. You click the arrow to expand it, type your question in the text area and click send. This webinar is not intended to address specific client data situations or specific agency issues. Please contact the HMIS Help Desk. The email address is there, helpdesk@allchicago.org. The materials and webinar recording will be made available via URL link to the Help Desk, and we'll send that out at the conclusion of this webinar as soon as the recording is made available, and we'll have a PDF copy of the slides available as well. So our agenda for today, to go through some HUD HMIS updates, some WellSky HMI updates, COC HMIS updates, review the data quality for third quarter, and an update on the longitudinal system analysis report that we need to file with HUD. And then we'll have some time at the end for questions. So for the HUD HMIS update, there's quite a bit to cover this morning. Here are some of the items from the HMIS lead webinars over the last several months. The longitudinal system analysis reporting is open, as we mentioned in the agenda, and we'll have more on that later. They issued a reminder on protecting client personally identifiable information. HUD is moving forward with a standard for the HMIS application programming interface. An API is a set of functions that allow an HMIS to exchange data in real time with other systems. And they were looking to publish their first specification for this in October. So that may be published at probably the HUD Exchange. If we can find that, we'll make it available to you. They had a review of APR and CAPR requirements. And as a refresher, the COC APR is required for all projects with funding sources that start with HUD:\COC. APRs are due 90 days after the project's anniversary date each year, and the APR must be submitted in SAGE. The ESG CAPR report is required for all projects with a funding source that start with HUD:\ESG. CAPRs are due 60 days after a project's anniversary date. The CAPR must also be submitted in SAGE. There is a SAGE user manual at that URL link. If you are looking for information on data errors and data validation, there is a document that goes through, a guidebook document that goes through those data validation errors. And you can also get help with any kind of data validation error or other issue with your APR or CAPR from the help desk. Any questions on the first page of content for the HUD HMIS updates? Okay. The Chicago COC was granted special NOFO funding this year, and the APRs for that are due on December 29th of this year. We're working with our own internal group to do that, and there may be some of the agencies that also have projects under the special NOFO funding. Just a reminder that APR is due at the just before the end of the year. The PATH annual report upload period is from September 16th to December 16th, 2024. There's an updated YHDP dashboard in Sage for those serving youth clients. They had content on using EVA to identify and correct data issues. This is good both as an ongoing data validation process and as part of the longitudinal system analysis, the LSA, and we'll have more on that later also. HUD is seeking input on the fiscal year 2027 data standards proposed changes. That feedback is due by May 31st of next year. They have a survey. The link is here in the slides. Or if you have something in a document of your own, you can email those suggestions to hmis@hud.gov. There were some minor data standards updates implemented by all the vendors before October 1st of this year, mostly regarding changes to and corrections to the HMIS CSV file and to the APR and CAPERS reports. Any questions so far? Okay. And then finally, there was a reminder in the September HMIS lead webinar, if I recall correctly. HUD suggested that we provide a reminder regarding housing move-in dates. This is mostly, can I drop the link to the survey in the chat? Let me go back and do that. Oops. Let me continue with the slides, and I will do that in a break here. So the reminder for the housing move-in dates was prompted by issues they had with rapid rehousing projects and the new services only RRH project type. So to recap, the housing move-in date is defined by HUD, and this is directly from the slides that they provided in the HMIS lead webinar. It's the date the client moved into permanent housing. It must be entered if and when a household moves into any type of permanent housing, regardless of the funding source or whether the project is providing the rental assistance. And that differentiates between clients who are housed and those who are experiencing homelessness at different points during their enrollment. The move-in means that it's all of these, not one or the other. This is an and. A lease arrangement has been made. The client has a key ability to enter the entry ability to the unit, and the client has physically slept in the unit. The date may or may not align with the lease date. If communities need to collect lease dates for local reasons, they should use a custom date element. Questions on that? Okay. The HMIS we use is called Community Services. It's provided by a company called WellSky. And they have a roadmap that we shared in the last ATA meeting. So we can move all these dates back a couple of months. But they have changes to the HMIS that they split into 3 different categories the next 3 months. So some of the stuff should already be done the next 3 to 6 months, and then later is 6+ months. In terms of the market compliance ones, and again, in the next 3 to 6 months categories, because the other ones should pretty much be done. The system performance measure details report update and the LSA annual updates. HUD has pushed out some changes to the LSA even within the last 30 days, so the vendors are a little bit scrambling to make sure their LSA version is up to date with that, so we can complete that. Under the user interface and user experience enhancements, they're looking at adding some data quality validations into the user interface. So if things are not correct dates or incorrect date ranges or not the right values, they are adding some validations into that. Not a lot of specificity on that. In the next 3 to 6 months, we talked about this in the last ATA meeting, the entry-exit table updates have mostly to do with moving the housing move-in date into the update data as opposed to making it an assessment answer. And the in interoperability, WellSky has its own API, and they're making some changes to the they call it CRUD, but it's change, read, update, and delete. It's an acronym I hadn't heard before. So making some changes to the client API, and then currently they're working on changes to the provider API. In infrastructure enhancements, they're adding some fields that were part of the 2024 data standard update into business objects. And they're working on enhancing the security for the system in terms of doing multi-factor authentication. That's what MFA stands for. And single sign-on, that's SSO support via Okta. So you may be familiar in other applications that you use that in addition to logging, providing a password, sometimes there's a code sent to your mobile device or an email sent to an email account. So that's what the multi-factor authentication is. The single sign-on, I'm not quite sure what they mean by that. Usually that means they're using the credentials from another application, but they will provide updates on those sorts of things. Any questions on any of the WellSky updates? Okay. For the Chicago COC HMIS updates, the HMIS committee approved the implementation of changes to HMIS visibility as part of the All Inside initiative. We talked about this in the August meeting with some things that were being some options were being considered for certain types of data. There's a slide that's a little out of sequence here at the end about what visibility is and how it's monitored or how it's manipulated. There are in the HMIS and the way that WellSky has implemented it, there's what they call static and dynamic data. The dynamic data is basically stuff that's entered through assessments. And the static data are things that are like client master data or other types of data in the system that are not entered via assessments. So what I wanted to do was share with you what the HMIS committee approved. And if there's any questions as we go along, please bring them up. So it's a long list because we have a lot of different kinds of assessments currently in the HMIS. And so this is basically, there's some categorization here, but it's basically an assessment by assessment recap of what the sharing, the visibility sharing will be going forward when we get into the implementation stage. Up to this point, we've been talking with other COCs and talking with WellSky and gathering community input and things like that as to how to go about this. We're going into a very busy reporting season, so it's probably going to be after the first of the year when we start getting into implementation. But we wanted to share with this group what was approved by the HMIS committee. So the standard HUD assessments, these are the standard entry assessment, exit assessment, update assessment, things like that, that are for the HUD COC type projects. The data on those assessments will be globally shared except for the HOPWA program types. The coordinated entry custom assessment, which gathers data specific to coordinated entry, will be globally shared. The coordinated entry transfer assessment will stay the way it is, which is shared between the agency doing the transfer transaction and coordinated entry. The Health and Human Services path assessments will be globally shared except the youth assessments. VA assessments will be globally shared. The contact information, that new assessment that we put in place, will be globally shared. The homeless prevention call center assessment will be globally shared. State homelessness prevention project assessments will be globally shared. And the accelerated moving event entry assessment will also be globally shared. Any questions so far on this batch? We have 2 more slides to go, just as a heads up, or maybe 1 more slide. Erica has a question. Will we have access to pull this data in business objects? So the way that visibility works is that when you run a business objects report, the data that's available to you to include in the report is based on the visibility that you have as a user and the visibility that the client data has as part of this setup. So the short answer is for the new data, because this is all done on a go-forward basis, for the new data that is entered, depending on which assessment it's brought in, and most of them are globally shared, but depending on which assessment is being used, yes, you will have access to that data both when you go into the HMIS and look at it on the screen, as well as when you report it through business objects, and when you report it through your APR and other kinds of things. If you have visibility to it under the new setup, you'll be able to see it in the application, see it in the reports, and see it in business objects. Other questions? Okay. On the next slide, there's a COVID-19 high risk assessment that will be globally shared. The DFSS and Illinois Department of Human Services supplemental assessment will be globally shared. And then the rest of these are more the static data kinds of things. There's something called an action step in the HMIS that will be globally shared. The call record for the homelessness prevention call center will be globally shared. Case manager data will be globally shared. Case notes will be globally shared. The entry exits, so every enrollment that a client has will be globally shared. File attachments will be globally shared. Goals will be globally shared. Incidents will be globally shared, and needs and services will be globally shared. Questions on any of those? Other agencies, so Joy is asking a question, other agencies won't be able to edit our data right. So visibility is, it depends on the role of the person as to whether they have read-only access into the HMIS or not. But other than that, if the data is visible, it is possible for the person who is viewing the data to also change it. And we've had conversations about this with the HMIS committee, and this is going to be a training issue and a sort of a courtesy and other kinds of things. And we're looking at reporting to try to identify if there are cases where data from another agency's enrollment are being changed, that we can identify that and provide information and corrective action and things like that, so that as we're in a more open system, you know, the guardrails and rules of the road and all that kind of stuff are well understood, so we don't have there's benefits to the visibility, and we want to make sure that the rules are being observed and people aren't going in and changing data that they shouldn't have, they shouldn't be changing. Other questions? Oh, sorry, I missed one from uh, Joanna. Yes, thank you, Kevin. Will we be able to access these slides after this meeting? Yes, as we said at the beginning, the webinar is being recorded. And the recording will be available to everyone at the Help Desk website, along with the PDF copy of the slides. Other questions? Oops. And as I said, this is from our meeting in August. What is visibility? It refers to what data in the HMIS can be seen by that user. It can be controlled in the following way. Clients can be locked, so it's by client, by the HMIS data type, entry, exits, assessment, services, things that we just went through, and then by the user role and the agency project assignment. And again, we'll be sharing the schedule for when the implementation will begin, and there will be a lot of training and documentation updates and things like that. This may have impacts in the release of information and lots of other things. So there's a lot of work to do surrounding this. And again, none of the implementation stuff has started yet, so we'll be giving everyone a heads up on that, and involving lots of people in the community, including agency technical administrators in doing testing and validation, and help with the documentation and all that kind of stuff. So. The data quality for third quarter of 2024, it's in progress. Please ensure that all the data corrections are completed by Thursday so that data is available on the day of submission, which is Friday. There should be a separate data quality file generated for each project. We still have a few outliers where we get multiple projects in a data quality report file, and when that happens, there's no name generated inside the file, and those can create some issues in terms of including that data in the final results. But you can do multiple attachments in one email submission when you send them to dataquality@allchicago.org. The help desk article link is provided here. If you have difficulties, there's office hours still available upon request. Please reach out to the help desk to request a session. Note that the utilization report for data quality is updated for rapid rehousing projects to use the current occupancy as the project inventory. And we will post results next week. So we give everyone a chance to get those in by Friday. Any questions on the data quality for the third quarter, or process questions or anything regarding data quality? Okay, we got a couple of questions. So from Samantha, there's a question about what NA means.
So Samantha, I can answer this question for you. So the data quality period right now is looking at quarter 3, which is going to be from July 1st to the end of September. So if you don't have any to your project during that time period, then you're not gonna pull into your particular report. But if you would like to schedule time, I can follow up with you after this call.
The other part that you're asking Samantha about, if you're supposed to choose all of your projects. When you run a data quality report, you should only be choosing one project for each report. So if you have 1954, 1956, and 1955, each one of those needs to be in a separate run. Do not put all 3 project IDs in one run of the data quality report. Erica Hernandez has a question. Can you talk more about the API WellSky is working on for sharing data with other systems? Yes. So there are two things going on simultaneously, and I don't know to what extent they are aligned yet. HUD is working on an API and a specification for an API that all HMIS systems will need to conform with. They're in the very early stages of that, just in the infancy of publishing and getting feedback on a specification document and things like that. So there may be some alignment between that and what WellSky already has in place. But I don't know the extent to that because I haven't seen the specification document from HUD. As to what WellSky already has, they several years ago started out with an API that was not very functional. And they've been making a lot of changes to it because it's the way that they are enabling being able to get at the HMIS application using a mobile device, using your phone or a tablet or things like that. And so that interface from the mobile device is using the API that they're putting in place. And they actually have put in place. Not to get overly technical, and if your agency is particularly interested in this, we can talk about it. Let me back up a second. So an API is basically a way for a program that's written on some other system to access data in the HMIS. So you have to have programmers, you have to have people who can use the kind of programming calls that the API is implemented in and things like that. So there's not, it's a capability, but there's nothing necessarily built to use that capability, as I said, other than the mobile interface that WellSky is working on. So basically there's these things that are waiting to hear from somebody, but if nobody actually has a program to call them, nothing really happens. So if you put those kinds of people and those kinds of capabilities in place within a third-party system, like another case management system or something like that, there's an ability for that system to do certain kinds of calls and say, give me the name and date of birth of this client, or give me the enrollments with this entry and exit dates and housing move-in dates and things like that for this client or this set of clients. And in some cases, they have the ability to actually update that data using the API inside of the WellSky HMIS. There is an extra cost associated with implementing that for any COC. It's several $1,000s to do that. And then there's an ongoing monthly or annual expense for the maintenance of it that WellSky charges as well. So it's not automatically included with the HMIS. With our HMIS subscription, it would be an extra cost kind of thing. And then if anybody wanted to use it, it would require some sort of programming development resources to actually access it and utilize it in any specific way. And as the HMIS lead, we'd want to be involved in that because the access to it and what you can do in it is limited by the user ID you use to access the API. But given that it has the ability to do updates of data in the system, we'd like to be very, very careful about who has access to that piece of the API and what kinds of updates can be done on the system on an automated basis. Because when you let a program loose doing data updates, you can change a whole bunch of data in a short amount of time, and recovering from that may be problematic. So that may be 100 times more than you wanted to to know, Erica, but are there other specific questions that you have about the API? You're welcome. As I said, the thing to keep in mind is if you have an internal case management system like Caseworthy or something like that, there's nothing pre-built that interfaces Caseworthy with community services from WellSky. You know, all that stuff would have to be built. And then the other thing to keep in mind, because we've had these conversations with other consultants and things like that, given that the data standards change every 2 years, that API is going to change, the values in the API, so there's going to be maintenance on it. It's not a one-off where you build an API and you're done. It's going to require some level of ongoing maintenance to keep it working with whatever system you built the interface for. Exactly, yep. Any other questions? Okay, so the longitudinal system analysis, the LSA. For those who are unfamiliar with it, the LSA report, which is produced from the HMIS and submitted annually to HUD by the HMIS team, provides HUD and COCs with critical information about how people experiencing homelessness use services in the continuum. It also checks for consistency errors and other types of data issues and data errors in our system. The other thing that I will mention that's not on this slide is HUD and HUD, the SNAPS group. For a lot of these reports, they used to just be separate reports. We do the LSA, we do the system performance measure, the SPM, we do the housing inventory count, the HIC, and nobody ever checked to make sure the data was consistent across those. That's all changing. In fact, for the HIC, they want to use the data that's produced for the project inventories and things like that from the LSA submission. And they actually check to see how much it's changed between when we submitted the LSA and when we submitted the HIC. And those discrepancies, as well as how many errors we still have, how many other kinds of issues we have with data in the system, is factored into what's called a usability index. Whether our data is usable by HUD to do different kinds of analysis and things like that. And all of those things in terms of the usability and in terms of the discrepancies across reports and things like that are used in scoring for when we do, as a community, grant applications. So it's hard to overemphasize the importance of making sure that we're resolving data issues and making sure that our LSA submissions and other things are as consistent and as error-free as possible. So that's why we're going to be reaching out to providers to help correct the information entered under their projects and correct inconsistencies. So one of the big things, we'll get into this list in a second, but as is highlighted here, the duplicate and overlapping enrollments. So if people are in 2 permanent housing projects at the same time, if people are in 2 emergency shelter projects at the same time, people are in other types of projects at the same time, that gets flagged by these LSA reports, and we need help in resolving those kinds of errors. So this is sort of a heads up and a request for as much cooperation as possible to help resolve those kinds of errors. So we already mentioned the duplicate and overlapping enrollments, the participation status. So one of the consistency things that's checked is for each project, there is a operating start date and an operating end date for the project. And that gets compared to what are the entry dates of individual enrollments in there. And if you have an entry date that predates the start date, or an entry date that comes after the operational end date, that's data inconsistency, and that's a bad thing in the HMIS. Utilization, there are different specialized bed types. So if you say that your inventory that the project serves mostly families and all you have are single enrollments, that's going to get flagged as an error or as a problem in the LSA. Enrollments that are missing a head of household, which means no client in household has a response for the relationship to head of household and itself head of household. And enrollments with more than one head of household, we have multiple clients who have a response equal to self head of household. There are lots of other kinds of issues that we'll see on the next slide, but these are the ones that we'll be reaching out to as we work through the various kinds of errors that are showing up as we do these trial runs of the LSA. And just as a note, in advance of our team reaching out, you can proactively run the head of household and client location business object reports to identify those kinds of household errors. And there's a help desk article that's listed at the bottom of this page that'll detail how to run that particular report. Any questions? Okay. In addition to the team reaching out, we encourage providers to review their project data using the EVA tool from HUD. We've talked about this in previous ATA webinars. It identifies data errors and data issues related to your project. And here's a list of the types of errors and issues identified in EVA that you can correct just by seeing them and running this without us even reaching out to you. So duplicate entries, overlap with a permanent supportive housing project, missing a relationship to head of household, no head of household, multiple heads of household, incorrect date of birth or entry date, missing, there's an entry for what is the COC, which in our case is always IL 510. If that's missing, that's a problem that EVA identifies, and it's a problem in the LSA submission. And there are two help desk articles that are highlighted at the bottom. One generated by us, and then on the EVA site, there is a manual and other help information at that URL. Can the EVA site link be dropped in the chat? Sure. Alex, you use it most often. I don't know if you can take care of that or not. Any other questions? Thank you, Alex. That's the end of the content that we had planned for this. Any other questions? The HMIS team will hang out for the next few minutes in case there are other questions that come up, but otherwise that's the end of the content for today. So if you'd like to just checking if this training was recorded and the slides will be distributed. Yes, it is being recorded, and as we said at the outset, the recording and a PDF of the slides will be posted to the help desk under the ATA webinar, ATA meeting help desk article. Thank you everyone for joining. Apologies again for the delay in getting started. And we appreciate your participation and all the stuff that you do for the COC. So thank you again. And again, we'll be here for another couple of minutes if there's other questions that you have. And Matt, I dropped the link into your question in the chat, in the questions. Oop, looks like I did it twice. Okay, we're going to end the webinar if there's no further questions. Thank you again, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.